So the last thing is we need to talk about the reciprocal function because that's the one thing we haven't really talked about. I mean, we mentioned cotangent, but that's about it. So I figured I'd just do a quick video about that, and I promise, actually quick. So let's say we have secant of 7 pi over 6. Okay? So I know secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So if I figure out what cosine is, right, I'm going to think about this as 1 over whatever cosine of 7 pi over 6 is, and then just take the reciprocal of that. So I know it's going to be 1 over radical 3 over 2 because cosine of pi over 6 is radical 3 over 2, but it's 7 pi over 6, so all students take calculus. So t, that's in the third quadrant, so I know it should be negative. So I can say that's going to be negative 2 over radical 3, but I want to rationalize the root. So I'm going to rewrite that and get 2 radical 3 over 3, but it has to be negative. Done. That's it. Yeah. If instead it was cosecant instead of secant, the only thing I would do is just change the ratio. So let's say same thing, but now it's cosecant. Okay, well, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, and sine of pi over 6 is going to be a negative 1/2 because still pi over 6, but now it's sine, so it's that value, but negative because it's still in the third quadrant. Only tangent is positive in the third quadrant. So then that just changes that answer to the reciprocal of that, so it should be negative 2. Don't have to rationalize that, so I'm done. And that's it. I did the cotangents. Now let's talk about if I gave you the trig ratio that you're supposed to get for these reciprocals, and you need to figure out what the angle is. So let's try to do. Oops. Let's say we had. Uh, hmm. Let's say we had secant of theta equals radical 2. Okay. So secant is the reciprocal of cosine, so I could think about this as cosine of theta would be the reciprocal of radical 2, so I should have a 1 over radical 2. Which then, that doesn't help me because I don't see that in my table. So I rationalize it and figure out it's equivalent to radical 2 over 2. Now I'm in familiar territory. Cosine of pi over 4 should give you a radical 2 over 2, but it could also be a 3 pi over 4, a 5 pi over 4, and a 7 pi over 4. So now the issue is it's a positive right here. So because this is a positive, I know I'm not going to use whatever is in the second and third quadrant because cosine, all students say calculus, C, is positive in the first and fourth quadrant. So my answers are pi over 4 and 7 pi over 4. Bing, bang, boom, done. If you understood how I was, if it was if it was cosecant instead of secant, do the same strategy I used. Just replace cosine with sine and see what you come up with. Yeah, so as long as you take the reciprocal and then you try to rewrite it if it's not something clear that you recognize. So like this right here wasn't clear, so then I knew to produce this instead, making familiar territory. It's equivalent, right? If you rewrite something into an equivalent term, it's still the same thing. It's a valid way to think about it. Hope it helps. Good luck.